coming from the bottom up, and that will have some consequences for our democracy. That's a little bit gloom and doom, and I'm not saying that I think that we're about to cave under the weight of Rome or something, but I think that there is some concern that that polarization is actually reflecting more of what's happening around the country.
Governor Hickenlooper, you come from a state that, obviously is a pretty contested state politically. It's voted Democratic in national elections. It's elected you. It just elected a new Republican senator as well. From the ground up, from the battleground state, if you will, do you see that gridlocked partisan outcomes in Washington are inevitable, or how do you make policy that people can agree upon when they disagree about so much on their personal political views?
Well, and part of it is the media is very polarizing, but I think go back and look at the time Lincoln's re-election. You couldn't be any more polarizing than that. Sure. There is a difference in the television, certainly, and all the visual media is a hot media. So, and the attack ads. I'm finding, Andrew's heard me say, I said this the other day, that Coca-Cola would never do an attack ad against Pepsi. Pepsi sales would go down. It works. Pepsi would have no choice but to attack Coke. Coke sales would go down. They'd attack Pepsi. Pepsi would attack Coke. You depress the entire product category of soft drinks. And what we're doing is depressing the product category of democracy in a certain funny way. And I think the way, at least on a state basis, you do that, you respond to that, is you try to persuade people. And I think this is what Cece, if I can be so bold, she said, because she was called Cece growing up. Trying to persuade people to see a broader self-interest for themselves than they originally thought. And you were describing the president and Congress both having an overlapping self-interest in getting things done. And I think on a local level, that's, when you're trying to persuade someone, you just have to listen harder and focus more on what their real concern is, because often it's different than what you think. And this is years in the restaurant business, that all of a sudden you say, oh, that's your problem. Well, heck, I don't care that much about that, and maybe we can work on this, and you end up with, again, a compromise that's not perfect for everyone, but that where enough self-interest overlaps so that you can make real progress.
Secretary Pritzker, what is it? Are you able to be in the solutions business while leading such a massive government agency right now?
Absolutely. Remember, I come from the private sector. 27 years is my first government job. In the private sector, your job is to find solutions. Give me the facts, give me the lay of the land, and then your job is to figure out how to navigate. And I think the reason that I'm optimistic is I think that there are overlapping self-interests, but there are also overlapping policy positions at this point, and there's a desire to get things done. And I think there's a desire, and I think there's also a recognition that we should focus on where we can actually get things done. There's some discipline going on. There may be, look, everyone's got their rhetoric and their political rhetoric, which is not my expertise. But in fact, if you listen carefully to where there's overlapping interests, you're seeing real progress happen. I think you'll see the trade agreements start to move in very short order. There's work going on to see if we can have business tax reform. And you don't hear the kind of negative conversation. There's realistic conversation. These are challenging issues to resolve, and they require people to stake out what's important to them. The president's tried to do that on business tax reform. I think the Republican House and Senate are doing the same, looking for ways, is there enough overlap that we can make a deal? Because the American people want to see progress. They want to see the United States remain competitive, remain a leader in the global economy. Why? They want jobs. They want to do better. That's the number one. If you look at all the polling, what does it tell you? Americans want jobs. They want an opportunity. They want to believe that they can do better for their families. And that's our job, is to figure that out. And I think there's more listening that's going on, as the governor said, and said, you know what, yes, there's rhetoric, and yes, there might be things that are said on either side that are being said for various political reasons. But there's also a lot of listening going on as to where the overlap is. And that's why I'm hopeful. It's a window too. We will get into, ultimately, the national elections, and that will change the landscape for the congressman and for the administration. And so we have to take advantage of the window that we've got. And that's why I also think there's a sense of urgency that I hear from the congressman is, let's take advantage of this moment. Let's focus on the things that we can actually get done.
the patient is still not well. Okay, so let's.
This was my
this
question.
optimism point that you were at before. I think the U.S. has gotten itself into a position to get well. 3% GDP growth we should not be celebrating. This economy's got a way more promise than that. The trade agreements and business tax reform will accelerate GDP. They have to be done. Unemployment rate's coming down, but there's a lot of people who've never worked. We've got to reskill the workforce big time. There are open jobs. Penny and I were chatting in the corridor, 5 million of them. I can't get a welder to build plants in the United States without paying them $200,000 a year. Maybe that's what I should be paying them. 20% wage inflation in the technician area on the US Gulf Coast last year. But we have unemployed people, so we've got to get reskilling done. It is a major issue that'll create growth. We've got to get at that work. It is jobs. You get re-elected on jobs, you'll get elected on jobs. The states work because the states have had some more, in fact, we've gone to the states preferentially the last 3 or 4 years, like, Colorado.
How much do you think that this inequality issue in the American economy, does that affect your business in some real way?
It affects my business because I can't get workers. This is absolutely ludicrous.
So to that point, this was not much ballyhooed last year, but a Republican House, a Democrat Senate, and a Democrat president cut the number of worker training programs we had, took the money and threw it in more focused ways. It was a huge success. I know, Penny, that you were very engaged in that, and that's the type of success that doesn't make headlines, but that's the real work that we've got to do. That's a matter of finding that little opening that you can do something small but significant. Tangible. I think you're exactly right.
And it's very tangible. And focusing is really, I think, the critical factor here. Let's not boil the ocean. Let's not try and get everything done. Let's focus where we can have the biggest impact. And the skilled workforce, I mean, you've got a group of people here who are very focused on skilled workforce. I mean, Cecilia and I first met one another when we did a set of focus groups on that ultimately led to creating Skills for America's Future, which really raised the awareness of the skills challenge that we're facing today. We have 5 million open jobs in America. That's crazy. We know today that in 2020, 35% of our workforce needs to have a BA in order to do the jobs that our business leadership is telling us they're going to have. We know another 30% need to have the technical skills and need to have at least some form of higher education. We're nowhere near meeting those needs. It's a real issue. The solutions, though, actually reside in the states and in the cities and in the regions. The federal government, what we can do together, which we did, was to really change the way grants work so that they're business-led and job-driven. So they're focused on, it's not about we're just going to give out money for training and pray that somehow it works, but instead it's focused. And that's where working together shows progress. And the congressman can go back to his district. I was in the Charlotte area, in fact, earlier this week, and basically tout, hey, look, this is how government can actually function and work well together. And the employers can look and say, hey, look, this is working for me in the districts.
And this question of skills goes right back to what you raised in the opening, which is the middle class family, the median family in America has been left behind. The median wage for in our country is the same last year as it was in 1989, right? So they've been left behind by the great advances of the 90s and the first decade of the 2000s. And what is that big differentiation in the workforce? Skills. Skills. And I say this with all due respect as a history major in college.
We can retrain you too.
Yeah. No, you already have. So a welder, what is fascinating to me is somebody with skills like
he's going to sign up for your welding job. That's higher paid than congressman.
Exactly. And that might be based on delivery, actually. So at that point, though, we need to focus on skills. And some of us, as Republicans, we see the workplace flexibility piece as very essential for middle-class families. Exactly. When the president brings up child care, it is a big issue for me with a 5-month-old, by the way, named Cecilia, at home. And the struggles that families have, and my wife has a very good job and has a fantastic career. So we're very blessed, but it is a struggle. It's a real struggle for families. So there are opportunities where we can figure out this path forward to get at this major issue that is a societal problem and not a Republican or Democrat problem, just a family problem in a country problem.
So I want to bring the audience into it because I know you are going to have great contributions to make as well. I believe there's microphones around, so if you just raise your hands. Do make it a question and make it quick so we can get as many people. I'll go behind me.
Well, when you talk about trade, what
Can you identify yourself too?
I'm Alberto Bello. I come from Mexico, Grupo Expansión. When you talk about trade, what agreements are you talking about? TPP, Europe? What is when do you think that Congress would pass a trade agenda?
Let's talk about the sequencing of the trade agenda. The first thing that needs to happen is Trade Promotion Authority, which is the opportunity where Congress basically says, look, here's what's important to Congress that's in the trade agreements. That, I think, you're going to see action in Congress, I think, very quickly on that, meaning we'll see bills start to come out, and then you'll see TPP is the most ripe. And obviously Mexico is participating in the TPP negotiations. Your Minister of Economy is here, Minister of Trade is here, in fact, and we're working very closely together to get that completed. And obviously our U.S. Trade Rep is leading the charge in terms of those negotiations. But there's really political, I see, having traveled to most of the TPP countries in the last year, there's real political will to get them done, but there's real also economic necessity for all of these countries. They see what is going to happen if this doesn't come to fruition. And so there's a navigation that has to happen in terms of, one, get the deals completed, two, get them in a position where they can, in each of the countries, be ratified. And I think that's the next thing that you'll see. In the meantime, TPP is being negotiated. It's not as ripe a deal as, TTIP as TPP. So the European negotiation will finish up later. And probably you'll see that in 2016. So that's the lineup of the trade agreements. What's really important to keep in mind, these agreements are what will are part of the plan that will continue to keep America growing strong. TPP, for the White House estimates TPP will produce about 650,000 jobs for America. And it has, benefit for the other countries as well. So this is something that's not just about, it's a nice to have. This is a need to have for us to stay globally competitive.
Let me get another question. Right here, sir.
My name is Drew Welton. I'm an American living in Switzerland. Tax reform on a personal level, isn't that a big way to move the needle in the states in order to have equalization of tax from the rich and the poor and have enough revenue to move the programs in terms of education, in terms of retooling people? That's something, a topic that the taxes are so complicated.
On the one hand, you said that you thought it was something that might be on the agenda. On the other hand, you said President Obama's tax statement in his State of the Union was dead on arrival.
He's asked for it since he ran the first time. The president got the tax increases he desired out of the sort of larger agreement 2 years ago. So to come back for an additional tax increase, I think is not the right approach. But actually going back and taking out, well, we've got a very complicated, messy tax code, period. So we need to actually think of our tax code as a matter of competitiveness, right? But that isn't just business, question of corporations and their taxation and their top rate and all their littering of exclusions and loopholes, but it's also at the personal level. The personal level actually affects my district more than the corporate tax rate because small business folks largely file as individuals. I think we need to do this in tandem, and that is my hope, and the administration will put force behind it. But if you look at the 1986 tax reform, it took the full weight of the White House and the presidency and a Herculean effort in a divided Congress. And it was able to get done, but it was very messy. It's going to take that type of level and engagement from the president, all the way down to rank and file members of the House and Senate to get this done.
But the reality is, Bowles-Simpson entitlement and tax, that package is not going to happen this next 2 years. Would you agree with that?
Well, those are, so just doing tax reform alone
I know, that's what I'm saying.
is a generational,
But there's a left-hand,
goal.
right-hand thing here. So.
right? But the question on entitlements, the president has already said he wouldn't go there.
Right.
The Speaker of the House, John Boehner, offered the president a package 3 years ago, and the president rejected that. We've already seen that. We read quite a bit about it in Politico. So the president has not been serious about entitlement reform. I was trying to focus on what we can achieve, but it seems to be the president is not interested in doing that. When I see this president as having a huge opportunity to fix a huge challenge for the next generation. My generation is the first that will have a bankrupt Social Security system. It is not responsible to the next generation to leave them indebted with a social safety net that is completely tattered. So I think it's a moral imperative.
Well, certainly, just to finish the tax thing, I think what the president's looking at that he can do is some corporate reforming of tax, and certainly making us more competitive with the rest of the world, while at the same time allowing large multinationals to bring some of that $2 trillion back into the country and use the revenues from that to invest in infrastructure, whether you're talking about highways, physical infrastructure or higher education. I mean, that's something that should be doable.
Is there demand in the states? I mean, do you feel like people are saying to you, we wish Washington would get this tax?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there is a need for infrastructure in this country that cuts right across partisan divides. Republican governors, Democratic governors, we all need. We're getting, congestion in our urban areas. Our broadband is not in every place that it should be. This is all stuff that allows states and therefore our country to be competitive with the rest of the world.
There's two words that haven't been used in the business tax reform that everyone's got to remember makes this very hard. That's revenue neutral. So as soon as you go to any business community, and I'm a member, K Street kicks into gear. So all
They
these...
already have it. So we had a story today that said that
well, that's where I'm going.
companies hiring tax lobbyists last year was a record boom year.
So the business community has got to be unified in saying this is good overall. Okay?
Right.
Because if the pie is just being redivided, there's no expansion of the pie, there's no growth, then this will never happen. And this is the issue in Europe too. So this has got to be for the greater good, and that takes a lot of work, and that's why I think it's already a hard enough exercise to get revenue neutral business tax reform that then will lead to the benefit the governor was talking about.
I know you want to jump in, Secretary Pritzker, and then I want to make sure we get some other questions.
Well, I think what you're hearing here is exactly kind of the situation that we're faced with, right? I think everyone wants to see this happen, but you've got, the business community has really got to recognize that in the short run, there are going to be winners and losers. And if everybody, and what the president has talked, I know, with Senator McConnell about is the fact, look, if everybody, all the businesses gear up their lobbyists, then you can make sure that business tax reform doesn't happen. We have to, though, the congressman is absolutely right. This is about global competitiveness. And what the leadership, I think, both in the administration and on the Hill recognizes, and I've heard this from, I've been 18 months roughly in my job. I've probably talked to 1,500 or 1,600 business leaders around the United States. They all want business tax reform. The question is, can we find a way to navigate it where we don't end up, everybody tears it apart, and it becomes politically unfeasible? And that's going to be the real trick.
Question, yes.
Greg Schei from ABB. Hello there. Question is around energy policy. We talked about getting things moving, being practical, finding compromise. For many years, there's been a big need for energy policy reform and having clear guidelines that allow for more investment, more jobs, building out the infrastructure that needs help, especially in the U.S. So any comments on where that fits on the agenda, what kind of priority, what we can expect?
Well, I've already
This
said...
is also your agenda.
I've already
too.
said, I mean, this has been my holy grail for 11 years. I haven't succeeded. So I would say it's in the too hard basket for the next 2 years, but there are pieces of it getting into place. So natural gas and shale gas and how that gets not just extracted safely, but enhanced domestically and exported. That's a real big value chain I just described. That's a big chunk, and Colorado, maybe you'll get to in a second. But the completeness of the question means you have to bring efficiency standards across the country into shape. That's a combination of federal and state, and